Hi, I'm Benjamin Boyce. And oh wait, no, that's not right. Hi, I'm Andrea with the Bangs. And I had the lovely chance to interview Mr. Benjamin Boyce. In effect, I get to be the one in the interview chair interviewing him for a change. As most of you know, Benjamin has his own YouTube channel and podcast and has been working on a multi-part documentary about the Evergreen situation. And I had the chance to speak with him about that Evergreen documentary. Okay, so here's the thing. The first 10 minutes is more of a conversation, kind of Joe Rogan-esque chat. Just in case there are some of you who want to get right down to the interview part, go at around the 10-minute mark, and that's when the interview really starts. But, there's some fun. There's just some fun at the very beginning. So actually, Ben, okay, we talk about me being allowed to call him Ben, by the way. But typically he goes by Benjamin, so I'll call him Benjamin in the intro. So Benjamin actually was pretty instrumental in helping me get this YouTube channel set up. It was just kind of great for me to have him in my interview chair, and it felt like it kind of came full circle. Anyway, so I learned a lot because I still have questions actually, but I had so many questions I wanted clarifications on about the Evergreen situation. So I was able to get a really clear timeline. I think it'll help you guys to know what exactly is going on, I guess, in that sort of behind the scenes, to understand how Benjamin's mind is working to produce this content. It's a cool look behind the scenes of this documentary. So I hope you guys enjoy. If you are new and you like what you see, please don't forget to subscribe and leave me a comment about what you think of the interview, or if you have any questions or clarifications. And without further ado, here is my interview with Benjamin. Yes.
Oh, you haven't?
I didn't. We were talking about how we're friends. And what else? How I call you Master Kenobi, so that works.
Is this how you're starting this? Okay.
We're friends. We're talking about how we're friends.
And you have a pet nickname for me.
Yeah. And you have one for me.
Well, if I call you Padawan, that sounds a little creepy, like in a Joe Biden kind of way.
No, but that's not what you called me that like once. Okay, so what do you usually call me?
Oh, I just use the symbol, the ampersand.
Yeah,
symbol.
And then you've shortened it to Amper, and then you've
also. And it's just Amp.
And now it's just Amp.
Yeah, you're like your little volt, just like going here and there within the tribal interface of our collective culture.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to open with, because it's important. So okay, but I do need to be clear. This is. Oh, okay. Push your book.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I need to be clear. What?
What do you need to be clear about?
That you're who you are. Ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
In internet land, this is Benjamin Boyce. Mm-hmm. Don't you dare call him anything else.
Arthur.
Benjamin Arthur Boyce.
Well, I mean, the A stands for something.
I knew. I actually just found that out because I was looking at your book the other day.
Oh, huh.
I didn't know if you were open about having that middle name other than the A. So.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to put the whole middle name in the Twitter thing.
Well, I did.
You
Andrea
did.
Lynn Lewis.
Well, Lynn is a little shorter than Arthur. Benjamin is already pretty long. I should probably just be Ben Boyce, because a two syllables is like how you design
a logo kind of brand. Okay, but you don't like Ben, and I found that out real fast.
Well, that's the first thing we opened with, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, can I call you Ben? Then I ask you not to.
And I got in trouble. Do you remember this?
Oh.
I do. from a fellow Ben of yours, just a follower of yours.
Okay.
He like got after me for calling you Ben.
Oh.
And you didn't know who the original thing, and you were just like, yeah, oh my goodness, it's like, hey, my name's Benjamin. Oh, so Ben. Okay, cool. Anyway, and then you're like, oh, wait, oh, it's her. Yeah, she's allowed. Those kind of gals, they're allowed.
Well, no, I said specifically.
Oh, you do remember.
Attractive Canadian women, usually younger than me. Those people have a pass. You people. You and Alice Boyd.
Okay.
And
yeah, thank you.
maybe Poe.
Okay.
You know what? Megan Murphy can do it. Can call me Ben too. As
She's
she does.
your age though, man.
I'm a little older than her.
You are?
But I guess she gets a pass. She gets a femme pass.
Okay. So those, yes. So those few handful of Canadian women younger than you. The very few.
Attractive Canadian women.
Yes, it's very few.
Did you see Brett Weinstein's tweet about hotness versus beauty?
Yeah. I was like, go on.
What do you think about that?
I was like, continue.
Should I pull that up?
If you want, yeah. So I think that he was going off of what he and Heather were speaking about back, last year when they were on the Joe Rogan report.
Oh, I didn't. Okay.
Yeah, so I listened to that, and so they talk about hotness and beauty, and
okay.
and Brett.
Can you remember the definition of hotness?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I was about to say. So here's what it is. He does a thought experiment with Joe, and he's like, okay, imagine someone who's beautiful. Okay, that's done. And now imagine someone who's hot but not beautiful. Okay, did you come up with an image for both? Okay, so they're two, and like Joe's like yes and yes, and so they're two different things is the idea.
Okay, that's still not a definition. That's just
a thought experiment. Okay, well that's my definition is the thought experiment. Okay, so I think that hotness is like I guess evolutionary specific triggers to show that you are
fuckable,
able to,
or bettable. Sorry.
Yeah. But then Jeffrey Miller brought up youthful beauty. And that's where I get a little fuzzy because that's where I'm like, okay, so bettable, youthful beauty, right? So, well, if that's not what hotness also is, I don't know. I'm a little
I
confused.
think I did an interview with Brett about pornography that I don't think ever got released, and he goes into the production of pornography, which sets it apart as something that's detrimental to individuals and to society. Whereas like sexuality is one thing, and even recorded sexuality, if it's emergent, is a beautiful, wonderful thing. But when you have an entire industry on manipulating sexual desire, then it starts to corrupt that whole circuitry. And so I wonder if hotness is that which is produced beauty or extracted beauty, like free-based beauty. Right?
He was talking about a cosmetic line or something. He was talking what you were talking about, the tweet. It started with something about cosmetics.
Okay.
So that actually makes sense because you're talking about produced beauty, so that kind of could be what he's referring to.
Yeah.
Maybe you should release it. That could clear some things up for some people.
Well, it's not mine to release, it's his to release. But I just brought it up because Canadian women tend to be less hot than beautiful, like less produced, or at least the ones that I've been hanging out online with. You guys, I guess all that cold
I just
and
have
the scarves
a
keep it nice and moist.
Blush. No, actually, where I live, it's like 5 times drier than like everywhere else.
Okay.
I don't know
But you're straight north. I mean,
I call it the North with a capital N, like Game of Thrones.
The North.
The North.
The North.
The North.
North.
Because we just have British stuff here, I can just.
You do.
So this is.
So what was the question? Intro. You wanted to talk about
intro, you brought up a question about Brett Weinstein, which is interesting, and I'm kind of glad we went over it because it's very current right now. A lot of people are making fun of it, actually. Sometimes I don't like that. Like, sometimes when people, all they do is, like, be like, oh, this clown. I'm like, is there anything else you have to say? Like, can you just critique it without being me? Whatever. Sorry, guys. I'm going into mom mode.
Well, I just have one thing to say about it. Like, it's not so much that I get annoyed with people who do that. Yeah. It's that I get annoyed that I have to look at that. And that actually subtracts from my experience to pay my attention into their, cul-de-sac of a thought,
That's interesting. Why don't you just mute those people?
It's too much effort. Like, that's even more effort.
Them? Yeah.
Well, you just have to figure out, like, the pattern of, like, not investing even more into that by judging it, just like seeing it, completely disregarding it as soon as your mind, you just categorize things, and you have to reserve your judgment. You only have so many points in the day, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to go around judging that which is useless to begin with. I mean, and it's one thing to say this stuff is useless, but once you do that, you need to stop investing any more emotional, reaction to it, because you're actually investing it with your own value by doing that.
So start reading it. If you don't see it going anywhere productive, stop reading.
Unless you are persistently notified from within of an emotional content that you keep on reacting to, then there might be something that you haven't quite worked out by which I mean solved or answered to the extent where you've solved that problem completely, where I've finally crafted the correct response to this, mode of argument. And once I put it out there, then I'm free of that. I don't have to do that anymore. Maybe.
Okay, I'm not there. So good to know.
So you can engage with that which is a dead end, as long as you're engaging with, the end in mind of finishing why that bothers you.
Okay.
Right, of solving that. And maybe even just, adding to somebody else's toolkit to be able to, like, wrap up that argument or that statement with a nice little bow of, like, shut the fuck up, bitch. Or, but something cleverer than that, But it is difficult when you're in that Twitter sphere. It's like, it's just everybody can say anything.
I know. And so I'm going to look at the camera, choose to say kind things. Okay? Okay. We're good.
That should be your next coffee mug. Choose to say kind.
Speaking of coffee mugs.
Yeah, look at that.
That's it. So I am rebranding, actually, because no one gets my old name. So I don't even anymore. But that's okay. I needed to kind of find my feet. I don't have a last name that rhymes with voice. It's like
but you have bangs.
Yeah, I know. So
that's pretty good branding.
The bangs of reason.
Yeah.
There's no reason behind that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna move on. So okay. So I actually have you here today, sir, to speak with you about your Evergreen documentary. That was the whole point.
Okay.
We took a while to get there, but I think that people will appreciate the natural flow. So, okay, how many parts are there? There's 26, 24. There will be.
I'm gonna not be able to pack it all into 24. Okay. I'm working on episode 16 now.
Okay. So you are going out of order simply to serve your narrative purposes. But for the purposes of this interview, I would like to start from the very beginning with, like, you freshman year.
Okay.
So what did that look like? What did Evergreen look like when you were there?
Well, what's the goal in mind? Like, what?
I want to find out what it was like before, and then how did things switch, and then no one asked me questions about my questions, by the way. Anyway, I just want to know how it's changed. How, like, I know bridges came, but I want to know what it looked like before all of the crazy.
Okay, but with the goal of understanding what? Like, what's interesting to you about the story?
Okay, because I want to know why, like, how it changed, why it changed. Was it always hyper concerned with gender and with race? And, like, was it always? was that all Bridges? Or what, like, was it Naima? Like, I want to know where it sort of started focusing on those things. But maybe you didn't see that. But that's why I'm trying to start with, what did it look like to you at the very beginning, or at least for the first few years? When did Bridges come?
Okay, hold on. So I want to frame this correctly so we can get we can tell a nice story
Okay.
to the audience. Like, what do you really want to know? So you asked about, was it always hyper concerned with these intersectional
Yeah, I asked a lot. I said a
issues?
lot of questions
And
in there. Okay.
to answer that, I think one way of looking at the Evergreen situation is that it was always really liberal. It was always really left.
Okay.
Like not even just liberal, but like leftist. It was
Okay.
always very concerned with the leftist issue of the day. So in 2008, there was there was a big riot there for one night, and they ended up flipping over cop cars, and like there's footage of them like actually punching cop cars, because a police officer attempted to arrest a man who assaulted her and or was smoking the cannabis cigarette in the open.
Okay.
And so that there was just like that night they just like erupted in anarchy. And then in 1998, actually, so 20 years before the Evergreen Spring, which is the protest that happened in 2017, they got into a big media problem because they had I can't remember this guy's name, but this guy who killed a cop and was on death row. In America, we very slowly kill people through a bureaucratic process called capital punishment. And Evergreen chose him as the graduation speaker. And so a recording of his was played during graduation, and that was a big dust up because, this cop killer in this hyper liberal college is enshrining like this behavior, this anti-authoritarian behavior, like this dangerous, murderous behavior. And those are just some examples. And also in I think 2004, this young woman who was an Evergreen student, went to Israel or Palestine, one of those places. They're really close to each other anyway. So,
Okay, sure. Yeah.
And she protested an Israeli company was demolishing Palestinian homes, and she stood in front of a tractor, and the tractor didn't see her and ran her over. So she was made into this big martyr about her. Name's Rachel Corrie. You can actually find quite a bit about her. That was in national news. But again, like how Evergreen appears in the national news, they are at the forefront of some weird issue, whether it's police violence or Israel Palestine, or this whole intersectional thing about race. So the environment there was already primed to start to proceed along a critical escalation of sorts of any sort of conditions could lead to a big blow up on given issues because of the way that the college had already kind of self-selected itself to be hyper this one way of thinking with very little dissent among the faculty and the staff and therefore the students, right? There was always pressure from one end of the political spectrum. And, when they have lectures or they have panels, there's never a debate. It's just a bunch of people that agree with each other, forwarding a certain position. So when George Bridges comes on, and he makes race the central issue of the entire college, he selects all the people who wanted that from the get-go. And those people were there for a while. People who race was their pet project or their big thing. And so he set up the conditions to put those people in power, and those people in power took the ideas that they had, which are descendant from critical race theory, intersectionality, and Robyn DAngelo very specifically. There's a lot of quotes of Robyn DAngelo, who is the author of White Fragility, both of the concept and then the book. And that set of concepts based on kind of a inversion of stereotypical hierarchies. So the white male was constantly bagged on. So my first my first class at Evergreen. And when I entered in 2013, I felt like I had stepped back into 1996 or 7, where like there's all of a sudden there's all this politically correct culture everywhere. I thought that we had laughed that off and moved on to actual productive modes of like, slowly refining the edges of our society. But no, these people are still putting up posters about the patriarchy and still like bagging on white men and the heterosexual white men, So I was in that identity category in every respect except for my age,
Right.
Which set me apart in two major ways. One, I'm an older student, so I've actually lived in the world. I have all this experience. And then two, I'm not necessarily as reactive as the rest of the students. I'm not, if I agree, I don't totally agree. And if I disagree, I don't totally disagree. I take everything with kind of a grain of salt because I've lived a salty, salty life, Just kind of flake that off in every class that I was in.
Yeah. So when you were there, 2013 is when you first started?
Yeah, winter quarter 2013.
And was Bridges there when you...
2 years later.
2 years later?
Yeah.
Okay, so did you said it was already sort of like the stage was set for someone to come along and do what he did? Or is that not?
No, I mean, the college self-selected a president that would make that the issue. When they hired him through various committees that were staffed by faculty and deans and stuff. So the college hired him. I don't have the documents of this. Like, those are some of the documents that are being held up indefinitely in their, bureaucracy that's perfectly protecting them. But race has always been the central focus of his career. He's a doctorate of sociology. He did a lot of work in reforming prisons in Washington based on racial categories. And you can go back and you can look at his different theses and his papers that he's written, and they are rather suspect. They don't really hold up. And I haven't done this. My friends have done this. My friends took a statistics course at Evergreen, and the professor had them review George Bridges' work, and they basically tore it all apart because it was really shoddy work. It was making a lot of assumptions, and then it was just finding data to back up the assumptions, and then to prove its point. Very circular logic and very kind of faulty stuff. But anyways, on the surface, he wants to protect the world from racism, and the first words that he gives to the college on I think it was October 21st or 22nd of 2015, he makes some remarks that are not prompted. He just kind of gets up on the podium. He says, I'm not going to be your president for another month, but I want to say this, that even though we made tons of stride with regards to race since civil rights, our country is still a fire of racism, and this is the most important thing that we need to focus on. And so we will start to have workshops and lectures and seminars about this starting tomorrow. And that's when, so he very explicitly frames the entire modus operandi of the college around solving issues around racial justice.
Okay, so when you went to, so that was a month before he took his presidency?
Well, officially, but he was already.
Okay. So when you went back to school after that, in that sort of speech, how did the campus feel different at all? Or was it the same?
That's when I worked in the media department at Evergreen. That was kind of my student job. And so I was on the camera and I worked a lot of events. And after, I wasn't there when he said that. I didn't work, what's it called? I think it's called convocation, like the opening of the year thing. But there were a number of different activities and lectures and workshops and seminars that they did. And I was on camera for those. And, I was on camera, and this is probably the key part of the story for me, which just completely, if you just want to skip all the work that I've done and just get down to why are you telling this story and what is like the essence of this story? It's that my first teacher on the second day of class, took me aside. I went to class expecting college, so I showed up to class on the first day of class. I had done all this extra reading because I'm like, oh, this is higher education. This is my time to just completely immerse myself in the life of the mind. After being out in preschool land and cafe land for 20 years. And so I come to class hyper prepared, and it's a seminar style class where you just start talking about the material with the other students. And so I just started asking the other students questions about where they were at so I could catch up. So I was asking for clarification about all the different issues and things. I was kind of forcing, it was like a pop quiz that I was like forcing all of my fellow students to actually like remember what they were reading because they had just gotten back from Christmas break, right? So the second day of class, I go to the second day of class is actually a Evergreen structures its programs differently than other places. You take one program for a whole quarter. So one program has different facets. And this particular class was called iconoclasm or iconoclasm, which means icon. The act of smashing an icon. It's called iconoclasm.
Oh, okay.
Right? And so it was actually the study of images, their power, and the power of destroying images, which totally plays into my entire project that I've been working on since then. So the first day of class would be a lecture and then a seminar afterwards. And then the second day of class, we actually were in the engraving studio learning about intaglio engraving, which is copper plates, and then you carve the copper plates and then you press them. And I'm probably mispronouncing that. And then after the print workshop, then we would have a creative writing workshop because there was a writing component too. So there's history and art and then writing for this class. So my professor takes me aside. She's actually the engraving professor, but she was there at the seminar the day before. She takes me aside and she very politely says, this is an odd thing to ask, but I want you to not ask so many questions in class because it took up a lot of space. And I know that you worked in preschool, so you know that you need to kind of share the class with other students. And she indicated a specific student that she perceived as not really engaging in class. And that was true. She just wouldn't say anything, wouldn't ask anything. And, and she wanted to make more space for this other student. And I was terrified. I'm like, oh crap. I was like that cocky man, like coming into class and dominating the whole thing. And so I went around and I apologized to all my other classmates, and they're like, oh no, that was great. You weren't telling us anything. You were forcing us to tell you things. So you were actually
you were asking questions. Yeah.
So, and then later in that afternoon, the girl that my teacher had pointed out, saying I want her to have more space in class. During the writing workshop, this young woman took a nap and just slept through the whole class. And I'm like, what is going on here? So you want to stop the man from asking questions because he's taking away from the person who is sleeping in class. And it was just like, am I in college or am I in high school plus? I'm like, no, this is high school plus, but it's Evergreen, so I can make this whatever it is for me.
Right.
So I'm sorry, that's a long story, but that's the setup for 2 years later.
Okay.
2.5 years later, I'm on camera at this, it's called Coming Together, a Call to Action workshop for faculty and staff to talk about issues around race. And they have a bunch of activities and speakers and statistics. The activities are creepy AF. The statistics are stupid beyond belief. And then the speakers themselves are incoherent. But I'm on camera, and that activity that they had is that they selected a number of people to make "this I believe" statements, where they stand up and say, "This I believe." And my first professor stands up with the microphone, and there's this interesting exchange of the cameras with the footage that I have, with the camera going and focusing on me, who's on camera, focusing on my teacher. So it really sets up there's two cameras in the room. I'm on one. the first camera like turns towards me, and then you see me on camera, and then you see what I'm looking at on the camera, which is my first professor.
Right.
And she says this, I believe, and I can't quote it, but she says that Evergreen is as complicit in white supremacy as any other institution. And when we ignore privilege, we marginalize students of color, and we allow white students to not question white forms of knowledge and science and art. And she makes this whole statement basically undermining white people. She's a white person, by the way, and like and making everybody who's not white person like some sort of like victim.
Right.
Like, what is going on? And I remember back to that second class, and how she asked me to stop,
right.
Taking up so much space. And I'm like, oh, that was a black girl, that she was trying to protect this black girl from.
Oh, okay. And you didn't. It didn't dawn on you until then.
I would have never thought that race was such a big deal, but it had actually become the center guideline for every judgment that this woman makes, right? And so when I was in class, she didn't see a student. She saw a white male taking away education from a black female. It didn't matter that the black female was sleeping and not reading and not engaged. It didn't matter if that white male hadn't been to college in 20 years and was totally primed to get on with education. And they did extra reading and was actually forcing the other students in the class to participate more and like upping the intensity of the educational experience for everybody in the room. She didn't see any of that. All she saw was race. And furthermore, that she didn't take her time to invest more of her effort to make that other student engaged. She rather wanted me to do that. Right? She wanted to offload the educational experience onto the white people in the room, right? It's our work to catch everybody up. It's not her work as a teacher. Her work as a teacher is to employ everybody else to do that, right? Instead of making the material more exciting for this one woman, she tried to make it less exciting for everybody else. And it goes back to this picture of equity.
I was going to ask you about equity.
Really, really stupid picture of equity, where you see there's these two panels, and one is equality and one is equity. And maybe you could just like pop this in if you.
Yeah,
if you
the
want.
picture that you made. Yeah.
Well, I varied the picture, but like in this picture, like three people are, illegally watching a baseball game, and they're behind a, they don't have the money to pay for tickets, right? So they're just like peeking in this. So, but you have to forget about that. So there's this fence, and there's these three boxes, and there's an adult, a middle child, and a little child, and they're each given one box, and the little child isn't able to see, whereas the adult has too much room. So equity is you remove the box from the taller person and you give it to the shorter person. So equity is about equalization. It's not equality, it's equalization. But you can't actually say equalization, because what does that mean? How do you equalize a learning environment? How do you make somebody who's taking a nap and somebody who has done all the reading and is asking questions equal? You tell the person who's asking the questions to shut up. And if you look at the footage at Evergreen, when you take that idea and you give it to the students and they run with it, the constant refrain that they say over and over and over again is shut the fuck up. And I'm quoting that. I'm sorry that that's a rude phrase, but they say that over and over and over again. Shut the fuck up. If you're not saying the right thing, if you're not doing the right thing, if you're asking the wrong questions, you just need to shut up. Like the baseline for everybody is to be lowered. And then to all be amalgamated into one supreme will of social justice. And social justice is antisocial and unjust. And Evergreen, as a story, proves that.
Well, because the graphic that you altered is you like cut the heads off of the two taller ones and put it on for the child to stand on.
Yeah.
So that's, you kind of described that.
Yeah, it's the Harrison Bergenon story by Kurt.
Yes. I'll link. I've read it on. Like, I'll link that story. But do you want to explain it a little bit?
Well, it's just basically the constant refrain is that, and when I did a video about Robyn DAngelo, and Robyn DAngelo actually came to campus and gave a number of lectures, and my teacher actually just like basically that teacher that I'm talking about just regurgitates Robyn DAngelo. Every one of her ideas, that teacher makes excellent art. And that's why it was so shocking to watch her betray discipline and craft and inquiry for the sake of justice. Like all those things were trumped by justice. I'm like, why would you give up all that for the sake of what? And when I critiqued Robyn DAngelo, I made an analogy about there's this, because you can't make everybody equal with regards to ability or interest or capacity or curiosity. You can't make everybody equally curious, but you can simulate equalization. You can simulate the lower rising up by tearing everybody else down.
Right.
It gives you this sense of elevation to tear everybody down, but you're not actually being elevated except for that fact of undermining the other person.
Right.
And that you see a cascade of that happening at Evergreen, starting in the academic sphere and then translating into the protests. Now, the protests are beyond the pale, some of the greatest cringe material that we have from the last 10 years. But all of that stuff is a direct manifestation of the ideas and the attitudes that the faculty and the administration seeded among the students. And that's basically my argument. And that's why I'm being as painstaking as possible. One, because I got to get all the material out there, but two, to try to substantiate that this wasn't just a one-off thing. This wasn't just college craziness and stupid kids. This is the end game of this equity mindset.
Do you think that there's any way to do critical race theory or gender theory or queer theory without it being ending like this? To do it in a healthy way?
Well, that depends. That really depends on your project or your goal, or what you're trying to produce. If you're just trying to produce critique, sure, this is one way of critiquing things. There's actually this really good series on literary theory by a Yale professor, and it's on YouTube, and it's also on, like iTunes U or something like that. I can't remember the professor's name, but it's called like criticism or literary criticism or something like that. And the professor, in every episode of this class or every class of this program, he takes one theory and he describes the entire theory, and he gives like its origin and explains it like a critical theory, one strain of criticism or of interpretation of a text, right? Hermeneutics or exegesis, there's different words for it. And at the end of every one of his class, he takes this little children's story about like some sort of truck or a train. It's like this kind of Thomas the Train Engine story. And he uses the theory that he explains to interpret the story. And he goes through he starts at the very beginning of critical theory. It'd be literary theory, which has its roots in people in theology and taking this text and making the text makes sense, right? So a theory makes material make sense. It makes a material make sense in a certain way. And the professor is brilliant, because when you get into the postmodern theories, you get into queer theory, you get into feminist theory, it tells a story on top of another story. So yeah, sure, you can tell that story all you want. But the weird thing about this critical theory stuff, the weird thing about the postmodern stuff, why I think it's really interesting and why I think that Lindsay and Nana and Boghossian and Pluckrose are doing wonderful work doing this, is that it's so infectious. Why is it so infectious? Why does it make everybody want to tell one story? It's like, and I'm sorry, I'm going to get in trouble for doing this, but while I was Evergreen, like I would know somebody was a feminist because they would automatically start correcting me, right? They would start to tell me what I couldn't say or could say, like they'd correct when I used the wrong pronoun, or like they call me out for making a joke that you could construe as sexual or sexist, or they would criticize me for offering to help them with a heavy object, right?
Okay.
Those girls, right?
Yeah.
Kind of the uppity 22-year-old, like girl power, like don't tell me what I can't do kind of thing. It's like
with a smile.
And it's like, yeah, okay, you know what? You can't lift that heavy object, but you can shame everybody who can, and that's your special power,
Right.
So critical theory, like that form of feminism, it's really addictive because it gives you a really cheap, really easily accessible power of being able to just interpret everybody's words and then force them to act in a different way. But you're not actually changing anything in the world. One, either you're turning people off or you're forcing people to think a certain way, but you're not actually creating anything. You're not producing anything. And the one thing about this Marxist kind of academia, postmodernist academia, critical race theory academia, this whole branch of interpretive theory that has its roots in post-structuralism, and you can go through. That's the stuff that I actually ended up studying, the stuff that came about before this postmodern stuff. That I thought, well, I found these directions we could have gone, but we didn't go in that direction because this other direction is very infectious, and it just takes all the stories that we tell ourselves. It takes every cultural product, every culture, and it reinterprets it in forms of, I guess you could just say, power relationships, where there's the oppressor and the oppressed, and everything is this one story. And to go back to that Robyn DAngelo video, when you reduce your entire life into this one way of looking at life, what is the output? If you tell a story, you're going to come out with different archetypes of behavior, different attitudes. And if you tell one people that they are the oppressor and another people they are the oppressed, you're going to give rise to a certain set of characters that will just manifest a certain sort of webwork of behavior over and over and over again, which is very limiting and ultimately you have to actually look at the fruits of this thing. Like, what does it produce? The attitudes that it produces, and with regards to critical theory, with regards to whatever it was that infected Evergreen, you have a bunch of people in power saying that they don't have power, or a bunch of people that don't really have power saying they do have power, and then shaming themselves or other people based on that, when they're actually ignoring the actual power dynamics in the room by taking this power dynamic from history or from stereotypes that gives them the power in the room or allows them to sort the whole room according to this power dynamic, which even if they end up in a weak spot in that power dynamic, they still have the power to organize the room according to this dynamic. And they get off on organizing the room, even if they end up on the bottom of the stack.
Right. According to them. And it sort of ends in, I think I know you saw it, that clip from that, I think it was a Marxist convention, like point of personal privilege, and they kept on. You edited something.
Yeah, I did.
You did that. Yes.
Their gender.
So that's sort of where it seems to end, is people interrupting each other to talk about their points of personal privilege and why theirs is worse or better, or.
That was from like the Democratic Socialist National Convention. I think it was in Georgia. I know it was on the East Coast, and that got published or made the rounds in August, I believe. But I went through that because I was like, okay, this is my next YouTube video. I'm going to distill this down to make fun of it and stuff. But I started doing that, and maybe we can talk about like that whole activity that I do. But actually, like I watched the whole thing just to get all of the different times that people stated their pronouns. And there was actually a lot of work that they were trying to do. But because they kept on interrupting themselves, you couldn't really see it. So actually, the way that they made themselves mockable actually distracted from the really interesting things that they wanted to implement in our society, like that really deep Marxist kind of superstructure that they want to impose is kind of it's hidden behind that ridiculousness. Right. And I think that the same thing with Evergreen. Like Evergreen actually shows the end of this belief system, but it's so out there that nobody could possibly believe that this is what people want in the world, or that this could actually be the end. Like, no, these people are crazy. These people are ridiculous. And like, no, actually, the ideas are ridiculous, and they're just acting out the ideas.
Right. And that's why you're doing this, to show how it came to be as opposed to a caricature of it, I guess. Is that sort of...
Well, that's one, I mean, that would be the interesting part of it, because there's a lot of different flaws in what I'm doing. Mike Nina did a 3-part video, and so we have opposite strengths and weaknesses. So his 3-part video, it's really easy to watch. It's wonderfully produced. It's got music. It's professional. It's totally professional. And on a narrative level, it's all the story of Brett Weinstein and Heather Weinstein. It's all based on one person's experience of this event. So it's very relatable. It's very understandable. I don't have a central narrator. I mean, I am the narrator, but I don't have a central character. Like, I have characters coming back and forth, and Brett Weinstein's there in the beginning, but it goes way beyond Brett. It's this whole it's like a shattered perspective, and it's all these different conflicting narratives, or all this different footage that's and plus on another level, I'm going backward and forward in time. Like, this is a truly postmodern project, and postmodern in the sense of using every other genre to make a super genre built out of other genres, or building a superstructure out of a bunch of little smaller pieces, or a bigger narrative out of a bunch of smaller narratives. And what's my bigger narrative? Like, that would be the question. Like, with critical theory, they have that superstructure of the oppressed, the oppressor, and then what ties it all together for me?
Okay, what does tie it all together for you then? Thanks for doing my work for me, by the
way. Yeah, I should shut up when I think of questions, because then I'd have to answer them, right?
No, you shouldn't, though. That is a really good question.
Well, ideally, I want it to allow the researcher, and I want to treat my audience as researchers, right? Like, I want to have a high demand for my audience. It's like, you're actually assembling this for me. And my last episode that I did, and I've taken an extended break because of personal things, but the last episode I did, I even said, like, there was an asterisk. It's like, the complete Evergreen story 15 asterisk, and then in the asterisk, I always say it wrong. So
asterisk, I think it's CKS, so it sounds like an X. Asterisk.
I'm just trying to preempt all the people that correct me on YouTube. I love YouTube. Just
don't worry, I don't get that many comments, so.
Okay, maybe we're gonna change that with this one.
Well, we will see, sir. So you asterisked something.
I asterisked, and I said some assembly required. And I took, there's this one character, or human being, actually. She's not just a character, even though she becomes a character in this drama, named Naima Lowe. Naima Lowe is a professor of media. And there's this footage of her, like, blowing up in the middle of the protests and, like, screaming at some professors. And telling them to go inside or go home.
Yeah.
Like, you have two options: go inside or go home. Yeah. And it's just like, it went viral. Like, that was another aspect of the story that just totally was like,
so you mean cringe. Before you put it out, that the footage went viral?
Went viral. Like, all of the Evergreen stuff went supremely viral. And that's another argument that I make, or that I'm trying to make, is that this story is so much bigger than Brett Weinstein, Tucker Carlson. This stuff trounced the internet and is being written about from a number of different levels. You know, Douglas Murray wrote about it. Jonathan Haidt wrote about it. It's actually telling the kind of people that don't write about it, because it actually sheds some pretty stark light on certain projects. Like, it's better left ignored by certain sectors of the media, which sectors of the media.
Okay. Sorry, can you repeat that what you just said?
Oh, but my voice is fine.
Your voice is pretty fine. Yeah.
I'm not breaking up.
You break up for like one word. It's worse for the video.
Then don't worry about the video. Don't worry about the video.
Okay.
Audio is king.
Okay.
Audio is king.
Okay. So, okay.
I'm gonna pat him on.
Oh my gosh, it is creepy.
No.
Well, it's because you did the hand, like, these are not the droids you're looking for. Anyway.
This is not the North.
This is not the North you're looking for. Okay, so,
So I was talking about Naima Lowe.
It blew up on the internet. That's what we were talking about.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. And Naima, that little clip, that 3-minute clip of Naima Lowe dressing down her, and you look at that, you're like, that's a professor?
Yes.
You know, talking to another professor? Like, well, hold on.
Yeah.
Not just that. That's the professor of media.
Yeah.
That's a professor of media. How would she not know exactly what that thing would do? How either she's incompetent or she fully understands the power of that piece of video.
Right.
And I think basically she's incompetent. Basically, she didn't understand that would go viral, but it gave her perfect opportunity to cry victim, because that piece of material gives her this outpouring of online hate, where she becomes ridiculed across the internet, and she gets all these very rude, disturbing emails. And she can take all of the solid criticism of how she should not be acting like that as a professor, or like who does she think she is as an educator to be acting like that? Like that is not education. She completely disregard that and show the one picture she got of a lynching. Right. She can take like that alt-right hate
and she can point
use that
to that.
And yeah, and you can just forget everything else.
Yeah.
You can forget everything else.
Yeah.
Perfect postmodern maneuver. Perfect media manipulation maneuver. But in the video that I did of her for the episode, just talking about the structure to get back to the documentary that I'm doing, I took her art and I took clips of her and I broke from what I'd been doing, which was trying to just create a very linear narrative. Like, okay, this happened and this happened. Even though I'm jumping around in time, it's still linear. Like this actually is from there. This is related to this other thing, you know. So I'm still using a pretty standard structure. But for the Naima Low video, I did artsy, and like I started cutting up clips, and I took a project that she did called 39 Questions for White People, and I interspersed that. And even if you look at that, like I could have spent another 3 months on this video or whatever, like finding clips that directly related to every one of her questions, or like reordering all the clips. But I didn't. I just did it's just all these different multiple stories that I'm telling. And that particular piece of media product was actually a aesthetic argument. It wasn't like, it was no longer journalism. I'm no longer telling a story. I'm making an aesthetic argument against Naima Low's art. Naima Low produces intentionally aharmonious or disharmonious or challenging work. If you look at her art, and so I took that concept and because that way of thinking and that way of doing art, I just have a huge problem with, and that's what they had to teach at Evergreens. Like the craft doesn't matter, the idea matters, or the identity matters. The craft is just there. It's just something that like you do that restrains you from like really becoming you. And while the Evergreen protest was going down, I was finishing like my final project, like the book that you have, right? And this is just like one piece of the entire thing. The final project is
go to go to the live streams for all of the volumes. Anyone.
This one piece of art, this little book, and it's probably blown out. This is an argument about craft done in the highest poetic form. And you know, you can put quotes around highest and poetic and form. You can put all those postmodern quotes around this, but this is composed in a very strict meter form. Like I'm embracing form in order to show that actually when we embrace form, totally, form can dominate you. Style can dominate you. But if you are the master of the form, the forms that you place in the world, if you're the master of the form, you can place pieces of art that persist, that have a certain gravitas. Now, whether or not my particular work has that gravitas or not, I'm not claiming that. I'm just making an argument against this. Throw everything out. You just do whatever. You don't have to worry about anything. Just be yourself, and that's the only thing you need to do.
Well, sorry, that leads over to a question that I've asked you before, but not on my channel, so I'll ask you it again, about why art is the answer to postmodernism. And I think you kind of already answered it a little bit. But that's what you were describing is fill it with something as opposed to stripping it down to only identities.
Yeah. Well, identity becomes your form, and then it becomes hollow. Like identity, using your identity as your form leads to just as much being dominated by the form than dominating the form, right? So I'm saying that, like, the book that I wrote, it's written in iambic pentameter, right? And then you have to ask on every page, well, did he control that form, or did that form control him? Was that form serving him, or was he serving that form? And you have to actually listen to it and consider it, whether or not the mastery of that form is there, right? Like that's that. And when you use such a stark form, it becomes very apparent by how annoyed the audience gets. Now, there's a lot of different arguments that I can make, but I'm just saying that if you replace identity or even intersectionality with, like that becomes your form, right?
Okay.
Like the most important thing is the power dynamics and this critique. I'm going to go around and critique the whole world of this. Now, there's another argument that I wonder who's making this argument, but that critical theory is denigrated because of all the bad instances of it.
Okay.
But maybe there's actually masters of this form who are actually doing the real work of the form that will eventually show up. So maybe identity politics can be done in a way that actually produces justice. And all we're seeing are the bad examples of that. And should we judge the entirety by the fact that it has a higher likelihood of leading to chaos than another form? I think is arguable or something that I would argue. But I think that you asked about art being the answer to postmodernism, and one tweet that I tweeted is that postmodernism or social justice is at root a narrative and needs a narrative argument to be dethroned. It's a poetic form. Interpretation theory based on literature. Like this whole stuff is based on literature. It's all based on stories, telling a story about other stories. It's turning everything into a story or a dialectic. They use these bigger words, but they're just talking about story. Everything is dialogue, or everything is they use another word like dialectic or dialogue or word, something like that. Everything is a story. If everything is a story, then you need a better story to tell the story. So they're telling a story about everything. They're reducing everything into stories, and they're telling one story out of it. So what we need to do is a better story. What's the better story?
Because there's some truth in it. There are power dynamics, but
it's not about truth. It's about usefulness. It's about living a life. This isn't about being right. Being right is subsequent to living a life. It's a story that you live. A religion is a story that you live inside. A properly constructed religion, is that which fills your life full of being. It's a structure in which it allows you to include more and more and more into your life. And a lot of these thought viruses, a lot of these negative religions that we're dealing with right now, and the trans ideology is another way of doing this. All these different ideologies are a way of fitting yourself into a box. Now, the properly constructed ideology or religion or life narrative is that which includes more and more and actually makes you more and more expansive, more and more inclusive of life. And so ultimately the argument is does this critical theory, does this postmodern critical theory, when somebody inhabits that, what happens to their character? What happens to the person that they are? It doesn't matter about the knowledge they produce. It's the humanity that they unlock and perpetuate. And then if you can show that as good or bad, then you have an argument. That's the ultimate argument. It's not about logic.
So that's why they're so powerful. Is that's why the thought spreads so quickly, because it's not about rationality or logic? Is that what you're? I think, weren't going there.
No, I wasn't going there. I was just answering the question about how. Your question was about the art as an answer to postmodernism. Just saying that art is an answer to postmodernism because the realm of art, or what I would say narrative, the realm of narrative, the way that we judge a narrative, it's not necessarily logical. It's dramatic. So what are the characters? And this is the other problem that I have, just with critical gender or gender critical theories. Show me the story that is free of gender. Show me. Not even the society. You want to take gender out of society. Show me a novel where gender doesn't operate or is not an operating factor. Just show me. Stop claiming that that's what you want. I want to see this future. I want to see this utopia, and I want to feel how it is. I want to live in that world. Right. And that's what the artist does. The artist, or the novelist specifically, creates a world in order for you to judge how it is to be in that world, both the character and the backdrop. of that. There's this one more thing, and then I'll stop rambling. There's this great article from '96, I believe, in the New Yorker by Arthur Miller. He wrote The Crucible, right?
Okay.
And he does a retrospective on the conditions of him writing The Crucible, and it was during the McCarthy era, right?
Oh,
and it's a very brilliant piece, and it's a fascinating piece. But in just this one section, he's talking about going to Salem, and he's reading all these documents about those trials, and he finds this little line, this beautiful moment. He finds this little line where the young woman who's accusing everybody else of witchcraft, she goes up to this woman, and it's just part of this document, like where she puts her hand and then like lowers her hand and touches it and raises her hand. It's just this little tiny artistic piece that's in this legal document, and that little image that he sees just like gives him he all of a sudden he's there, and he sees how it's a drama. He sees like, okay, there's all these different relationships and of power going on, and he just, there's this one little line that I wanted to get to where he talks about the moral center of a play, or every play needs to have a silent place from which all of the moral action can be judged. And I forgot where I was headed with this, but like trying to find that in the story, trying to find that, not that objective way of judging a story, because we know that there's no such thing as objective, but instead of using objective judgment, use from a quiet place, or from a still place, from a place that's quiet. Can you hear the content? Can you hear like the energies, or whatever kind of language you need to use? Can you actually make a judgment of these stories that we're being told, where you can feel yourself in them, and if they expand you or contract you, if they make you feel better, if they fit or if they don't fit. And which is not a rational argumentative thing. And yeah, rationality and argumentation needs to be there, but that's a handmaiden for reality. Truth is a handmaiden for that which is real, by which I mean livable. Can you live this out? It has to make sense. It absolutely has to make sense. But you have to have another sense of sense other than sense making. Like, does it feel right?
Right. That's I think why it popped into my head about the whole idea of like, you don't need logic to or reason for all the things that ended up happening at Evergreen, because it's not about those things. It's about, like what you said, it becomes tools.
Furthermore, it's impervious to that, and that's the interesting thing. That's one of the interesting roles that Brett Weinstein plays. It's like, I am the rational liberal thinker,
right? Of course.
And here I'm going to make sense. I'm going to show you how this doesn't make sense.
And then
and you see that clash. Like, I have this 45-minute audio of him, like we what went viral was the stuff where they're shouting him down, but I have audio of him actually walking people through how it doesn't make sense, and it shows how impervious to any other way of making sense, by which I mean any other interpretation of events, these protesters are. And Brett's just displaying a lot of flexibility and thought, and they're not. They're explaining, like,
it's like, no, one note answer. Yeah.
And eventually they're like, well, you just need to shut the fuck up. Yeah. Why can't you just shut the fuck up? Why can't? That's where they go, because they can't make any sense. So dialogue has to end.
So, okay, I want to ask you about, can we have like as if you're writing it out, like a little timeline of this information, like of the whole documentary? Can we do a little like point? Because I want to know, like, do you know what I mean? Like, I want to know.
What do you want to know?
Day of absence happens.
Oh.
And then I think that was in February, and then in May the protests happened.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Because I got all mixed up onto when all these things were happening.
Let's start. Okay, George. Trump gets elected on November 3rd, I guess, 2nd of 2016.
Yeah.
1 week later, the Equity Council produces their plan, which is actually plagiarized and cobbled together the night before with horrible data and
Okay.
zero argumentation.
Okay.
And they do this canoe meeting where everybody
Yep.
gets in this canoe and everybody has to agree, this is where we're
Otherwise,
going.
you're a racist. Yep.
And Brett Weinstein and a number of other faculty say, hold on, let's think this through. This doesn't make sense. Brett's refrained the whole time. I want equity, and I need to ask him if he still wants that or not. Because he keeps on, I have documentation over and over and over again.
Of him
I
saying, I
want
want
equity.
equity.
I
Yeah.
believe equity. So what does equity mean to him? Because I know it makes sense to him, but I don't have him actually explaining what he means by that,
Yeah.
which would be different than what it actually in an application is.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that he probably has a nuanced view of that. But anyways, I want equity. I want the same goal as everybody. I want the same goal. This isn't the way to get to that goal. Anybody who disagrees with this goal or disagrees with the method of getting there is dogpiled on. And that's been happening for years. When this whole thing starts with the Coming Together series, where they have Robyn DAngelo and all these, when President Bridges says, this is where we're going, they're like, okay, we come up with this thing. And it's all based on this email chain where this one woman starts saying that she can't walk across the street because she's got a black son and he's going to get shot at any moment now because we're complicit in these structures of white supremacy everywhere. Like this institution is corrupt with white privilege and white supremacy. And this person who's in charge of just taking care of like the physical grounds, they're like pipe in. It's like, you guys are crazy. Like this place is not filled with racists. And anybody who says it's not gets instantly yelled at and shouted down. Like, you guys are off your rocker, right? And everybody just dogpiles and shouts him to, how dare you say, oh, of course you're a white male. He's like, actually, I'm a trans individual, blah, 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 because it's Evergreen, and,
of course.
And, but so the precedent, Brett's not the first person to get in that. He just stood his ground. Phenomenally stood his ground. And so the Equity Council, they make their plan. There's some dust up. There's a lot of little dust ups. And then the Day of Absence, which is this play by Douglas Turner War about like this southern town where the black people recuse themselves from the town's goings on for one day to show how intricately bound their labor is, to the labor of the whole workings of the town. And if the black people leave, then the white people understand how they've been taken advantage of, or like just ignoring that this is they're a viable part. So Evergreen, every year they would have a Day of Absence where the black people at first, but then the black and brown, and then the black and all the
people of color eventually.
Everybody from all the different things. All the different things. They go and they have their little different thing, and then the white people have their own thing, and then there's the Day of Presence where everybody comes together and they're supposed to celebrate difference.
Oh, I've never heard of the Day of Presence.
Yeah, Day of Absence, Day of Presence, DOA, DOP. Like that doesn't suit the right wing narrative. Now, this narrative is really easily corrupted by the right wing narrative. It's like it's perfect. Like just earlier last week, some Evergreen graduate with a blue check mark went after Brett Weinstein because of this No Safe Spaces documentary with Adam Carolla and David Prager. And she went after Brett, saying that he shouldn't have gone on Tucker Carlson and all the bomb threats. And she was full of all this faulty information. But she told the contrary story to the Evergreen story. Like there's this narrative of this college that was obsessed with these leftist ideas that went crazy. And then from the left side, it's like, no, there was a college that went a little crazy, and then the right wing had to come around and threaten them with bombs and threaten to kill everybody, so like, and that's used to shut down the actual nuanced discussion of the debate.
Okay, I see.
So there's the Day of Absence, Day of Presence, and that's my critique. And I started writing about this after I saw my professor say we need to, stop teaching white science and white forms of knowledge because we're a bunch of white supremacists, like worse than any other institution. Like, really? Like, did you forget about like Germany in the 30s, like
a little something happened.
Really? Are we just as bad? Anyway, so when I saw my professor do that, I had to write about that. I'm like, listen, you guys, you guys are tearing us apart by focusing on our differences instead of like coming together, just having a potluck. Like, you want to solve this problem? Bring in different forms of music. Just have a multicultural day.
Yeah.
Like, but that's not radical enough. That's colorblind neoliberal.
And it could be
bullshit.
appropriation of different
That's appropriation.
cultures.
Yeah. Like, no, we are different, and it totally. Anyway, so Day of Presence originally was supposed to be the solution where you come together and you celebrate. It's like, oh yeah, okay, we are a part of a society. There's so many differences. We need to come together and stuff. And that core human principle of coming together and celebrating around the things that make us human, art and food. Like, if you just have a potluck every day or every weekend, if we just had a multiracial potluck every day, would do so much more for racial tensions in our culture than any other program or bureaucracy or theory or diversity training or implicit bias training. All that stuff is not just corrupt and not just suspect. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. What's going to work is just keep reminding people that they're people and putting them in situations where they can't. Bigotry only flourishes when there's distance between groups. It takes too much effort to maintain bigotry in the face of this data that you will be handed by your senses if you're put into close contact with that group that you have bigotry against. And that's part of what informs my transgender series. It's like, okay, let's just talk to these people. They're very rare. So a lot of people are just ignoring this because they don't come in let's go talk to people and just like, oh, they're just people and they have this other way of looking at the world or whatever, like, and once we get that contact going, then we can actually start to talk about these issues instead of vilifying each other.
So anyway, Day of Absence, Day of Presence, they switched it around for February 2017. Is that correct?
I think it's in April, actually. The planning
April?
committee, the planning committee in February decides that they want to switch the program where they're going to invite white people or dominant culture people to this little Unitarian church with seats for 200 people, right? So the argument, this is widely construed in the media, and it's really shifty. It's really shifty how they do that. They are inviting people to go away. And Brett Weinstein I think it's arguable that he makes a very rational point, but he's kind of misconstruing what Rashida Love is saying about inviting people to go to this other venue. Only 200 people can go. But I have documents that state that professors are requiring their entire class to participate, not necessarily show up to this other venue if they're white. I do know people who, because they were white, were required for credit to go and have class in the woods so that the people of color could be on the campus. So different professors implemented this in different ways. And there was also a social expectation that if you showed up and ignored this, then you were kind of in the bad graces of this movement. So Brett Weinstein, he writes an email, and then the school newspaper gets a hold of that email and prints it. And then there's silence. Day of Presence comes and goes. I was on campus for that. It was a Wednesday because I worked, so I just showed up, and I never participated in that. I just kind of, should I say this? I kind of just rolled my eyes at all these different activities that Evergreen would do. I'm like, whatever, it doesn't really. I'm not. I mean, I went to the Cornell West thing. That was interesting, but it was kind of disappointing. But that was in 2016. Anyways, the whole protests. The only reason that they chose Brett is because the protesters decided that they wanted to do a whole week of protest against the administration, against Evergreen College, to show how racist it is, and they need to change. And the protests were centered not on the Day of Absence thing, but they were sparked by an event where one student made fun of another student on social media. A Puerto Rican Native American student mocked a black student on Facebook. The black student's friend threatened the Native American Puerto Rican student.
Mm-hmm.
The threatened Native American Puerto Rican student went to the police to make a statement.
Uh-huh.
Police invited the Black student to give a statement.
Uh-huh.
The student took a long time to get back to them, eventually came over with a bunch of their friends really late at night and gave a statement voluntarily and was told repeatedly that this is totally voluntary and they could come back tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But then the students lied and said that they were escorted to police services and detained and not allowed to pee.
To get this statement?
Just to get the statement. They lied on social media, and that sparked in all these meetings where students come together like, we can't believe that we're related. And there's this other incident where, Brett Weinstein was this teacher and he disagreed with that. And then there's this other incident where the Black trans people are being prosecuted or persecuted by the administration because the administration doesn't want these Black trans people interrupting or protesting events, which is their civil rights to do that,
Mm-hmm.
and that all goes into the story and stuff. Brett Weinstein's a very small part of this. There was just they just needed a bunch of things, which every piece of this is baseless. Every piece of their story is baseless. And that's why I'm going through and showing, okay, like, look at this one, it's all baseless. But if you have enough of them and then you lie about it and then you add social media, you add Trump, you add George Bridges,
Mm-hmm.
you add a bunch of faculty, and then you add this small school in the middle of the woods with, it's kind of opaque, and then you just you jam them all together with some very amazingly charismatic people. Naima Lowe's pretty charismatic, even though she's wacko. And a couple of other students who are incredibly charismatic people. And then all of a sudden you have these students taking hostages and taking over the building and blocking doors and screaming and shouting and doing all this, roaming the campus with baseball bats.
Yeah.
And then you have the alt-right saying, oh, finally, we have somebody to mess around with, and then they just have this whole situation.
And then you can just blame each other. Okay. So, that was actually a pretty clear picture because it feels very jumbled. So it's all sort of separate pieces that fit, but aren't necessarily connected with each other. Of all the things that happened to Evergreen, like they are, or are they all connected in a weird way? That's what your whole documentary is about, I guess.
Well, I mean, this is why I think, what happened?
I know.
Like, what happened? Like, this happened and this happened, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then this, and then that happened.
And that's why I wanted to get a timeline, and it helps for you to explain.
No, it helps. Yeah, it helps for you to explain. But this is a symphony. This is more than the sum of its parts. This is a symphony, and this is actually what I studied when I went to Evergreen. Like, how do you make a parliament of fictions? How do you take a whole bunch of stories and get them to make sense together, or not even make sense, but get along? That my final project is that. It's just I have mythology, I have fairy tale, I have autobiography, I have journals, I have poetry, and how do you get them all to? How do you get all this? So the Evergreen Project is an extension of my Evergreen Project. Like, how do you get all these things? And ultimately, it's just there's so many different stories to tell. There's so many different stories to tell. And what I'm trying to do is just create the hub where all the stories can be found and ultimately lay out a lot of the timeline, even though I'm laying out the timeline and then confusing it by laying all this other stuff on top of it. So I'm both, creating order and throwing another level of chaos into it.
Well, like a good postmodernist, I guess.
Yeah, I'm a faithful postmodernist.
Okay, so
only a postmodernist is going to defeat, like Anakin. It took a Jedi to destroy the Jedi,
Yes, Ben Kenobi, thank you. So, I think I do have one question for you that isn't really. You've talked about that you have a posthumous work.
Yeah.
Well, why does it have to be posthumous? Or why not just release it?
Well, it can't be prehumous.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. Like, you decided it was going to be posthumous, so...
No, that's a joke. I say it's posthumous because it's an infinity amount of work that I'm probably not going to finish until I die. Or
Okay.
and actually, I don't know if you want to talk, we can talk about fiction.
Yeah. Well, I did. Can I please have you on again? Because I want to talk about story and meaning, and we didn't get. It's been an hour and a half.
Okay.
So I don't think we're not gonna do Joe Rogan here. So
why not? No, that's fine.
Okay.
Well, the way that I've constructed this series of novels is that they're written by different people, and it's all the same author, but the author like has a life and then he dies, and then the next author comes along. So it's a series of me going through different transformations as a human being, and every strata of my life is like given a different name and a different set of character drives, and then those drives lead to a conclusion, and then we have to reboot the whole human over again. Right. So by posthumous, like it's not going to come out until I'm a different Ben than I am now.
Oh, okay. I understand. Okay. I kind of think, is there anything else you'd like to add? Because I kind of think we covered most of what I wanted to get at for Evergreen.
Okay.
Is there anything that you feel like was left out?
Well, I mean, there's more to talk about, but I think you're feeling right that like we've come to a satisfying.
It's like there's a bit of a lull, if you want to call it that.
Well, no, like our cups are full.
Well, mine's empty.
Well, yeah, well, I know, but like the cup of the brain of the audience who's listening, like we've frothed them up in the headspace.
Well, I think that I really do want to, because I'm kind of been looking at like meaning and narrative in other episodes, and I really would like to have you back again at some point to talk about more leaning towards the meaning and the sort of that bit of your, I don't know, you're kind of like have a sort of mythologist sort of air about you. So if we could move on to talk about that. And it does kind of have to do with Evergreen because you are...
sort of religion.
Yeah. Where'd you go? Oh, there you are.
I'm right here. I've been here the whole time.
So, okay, I think that, then you just, you're there. You're too there. Why?
Don't fuss.
Ben!
Don't fuss about it.
Oh my gosh! You're giant. You're a giant man right now. Why does it do this? Why is it hating me? Okay, well, I think that's good. I think I did get all I have like a lot of wonderings that I've had through watching your documentary personally. So
yeah, you've had a lot of
wonderings.
Wonder? What's
I added an S to wondering.
Okay, so like they're little like poopy things that like pop out of you, and you're like, oh, it's like a little wondering.
Yeah,
I'm gonna save that for later and like watch it grow.
That's exactly what it is. I just add water, and they grow into interviews like this. I'm just fixing you. Like I just need a second.
You can't. You have to fix me in post.
I don't know how to like if you go giant.
Because now you're fixing as a part of the.
Well, I can edit that out.
Okay, all right, whatever. That's just a lot of work.
That's how I roll. So, I add worked for myself. It's great. It's only just a couple cuts, so it's fine. So okay, I think we're finished.
Well, it was great talking to you today.
Yes,
I hope that you advertise my book. It's a piece of poetry. It's not for everybody, but it will put your children to sleep if you read it to them and you might get something out of it.
And you have read some portions of it, which are great. So I will direct people to those.
It's on Amazon. It's fairly cheap. It's a really nice volume too. You can take notes.
Yeah, take notes. Yeah, and write them in the comments. So we can have more comments.
Comments in the comments.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Ben. Bye.
All right, bye.